Those top-line comments to CBS News would certainly suggest that the president is looking for an off-ramp. The White House and the president saw all these negative indicators in the markets over the weekend, oil prices starting to crest, stocks falling. And so they certainly have taken note of that. We're in a midterm election year, higher gas prices, not great for the president's party. That being said, we'll have to see exactly what the president means. He seemed to send some conflicting signals in that CBS News interview, also saying that he would want the U.S. military to perhaps take control of the Strait of Hormuz. That would not indicate that this conflict is nearing an end if you would have U.S. forces just off the coast of Iran there for the foreseeable future, safeguarding shipping while you have a armed hostile force right next door. So we'll have to see what he says here at the 5:30 news conference to flesh that out.
Well, it's interesting because it was just yesterday he called $100 a barrel oil a small price to pay, his words, and said the cost, quote, will drop rapidly when the destruction of the Iran nuclear threat is over, which didn't seem to indicate kind of, a little bit of pain for some gain, I guess is how he saw it. It's just a reminder that his tone and tenor can change on any situation. What are you guys hearing from inside the White House? We know that his advisors have been thinking more about the midterms and that affordability story here in the United States.
Yeah, they've certainly been tight-lipped about the immediate comments he gave to CBS, but all indications have been that they are sticking to this conflict, that they didn't want to back off. But the president, as you said, is fickle in nature. He could have had a change of heart looking at those numbers. It's also important to remember that this conflict was launched really without building up any public case for the war. The aims of the conflict themselves have been confusing and conflicting at times, and it doesn't appear that the White House has done a lot of thinking about the second, third day, fourth day after the conflict ends. What happens in Iran? They've chosen the Supreme Leader's son as the next Supreme Leader, another hardline choice. So it's not as if the president's getting the type of regime that he would be able to control, a la Venezuela there. So it really begs the question of what all this was for at the end of the day, if he does decide to pull the plug.
It's interesting, Jordan, because I think about immediately in markets, the Trump put, which is where this idea that Trump will intervene in any sort of way, whether it's reversing the extent of tariffs or any other issue that could potentially be hurting markets. But as we've been talking about just in this conversation, he hasn't in this situation necessarily allayed a lot of concerns up until today, where we're seeing this reversal. So just how important is visibility, not just for markets, but for swing voters, because we are coming up on this midterm election season?
Yeah, it's tremendously important. Voters, they care about the cost of living, which is high. Gas prices are one thing that is always on voters' minds. There are signs with gas stations all around the country. It's ever present in their mind and reinforces their perceptions of the economy. And so, look, I think that's obviously on the White House's mind, but they, again, never really stated a public case for why this conflict was necessary at this time. And now, this did not go as easily for them as Venezuela. The public is also very hesitant about overseas military interventions, especially in the Middle East, given how poorly Iraq and Afghanistan ended for the United States. And so, all these problems you're seeing coming home to roost for Trump. And, he might, pull out of this conflict, and that might allay investor concern in the interim. But, he's done a lot to destabilize the executive branches as an institution, the private sector as an entity. And so it's interesting to me that there's always this put where he's just going to do something more destabilizing likely in the future, given the track record of this administration so far.
Just 2026, and it's only March if you think about what's happened since the beginning of the year. Hey, Jordan, just one more thing. I mean, the president was also weighing the option of deploying some special forces on the ground to seize Iran's near bomb-grade uranium. Officials also concerned that maybe that stockpile has been moved. This is according to, I think you guys reported out, 3 diplomatic officials briefed on the matter. So there's also that at play. So again, it just gets to what's the mission, what's the end game here?
Right. And was the mission harm reduction, reducing the threat Iran posed, cutting off its path to a nuclear weapon, or was it regime change? Or was it, the president was upset that Iran tried to, assassinate him in 2024 and was looking for a measure of revenge? He's thrown out all these reasons himself,
Yeah.
and now we're left to guess, what the next step is.